I'm greeting everybody and noting what an important time this is for us to connect amidst all of the upheaval, and today being the funeral for George Floyd. There's something really, I think, especially meaningful to be here today. And in a little while, I'm going to offer some comments on the turmoil that we are experiencing. But first of all, I'd like to invite us all simply to enter or to move into the space of meditation, the sacred space, I would say. And I don't know if you can see it, but on the shelf behind me here, there's a candle. I lit a candle. I can see it's very tiny. It looks bigger from my perspective, but there is a candle back there just to grace our space and our meditation. And it's lit there for all the people of color, especially for Black people, but all of them who have suffered racism, not only in our lifetimes, but across the generations, the unknown, all those who are unknown, just honoring them today, especially. I know we always do in our hearts, but especially today. I think of them, these are people who were not able and are not able to breathe freely. George Floyd's last words, not able to breathe freely. So I'd like to invite us to sit in your meditation posture. Over these weeks, we've all been experiencing just many different emotions, but inviting you right now to check in with your body and noticing what is it that you are experiencing right now. Just noticing areas of tension or ease. And maybe you'll want to put a hand on that area of tension, an inner knot, if you will. What does it feel like? Noticing, like, is it tight or heavy? And if your hand is on that spot right now, maybe you will feel the warmth of your hand, your aliveness, radiating your aliveness, and knowing that your aliveness is the heart of what you are, is goodness. You are goodness itself at the heart, no matter what your failings or your perceived inadequacies. Let us remember we need not doubt our essential goodness. Allowing your attention, if you will, and perhaps your hand, to bless and to soothe any area in your body that's hurting at this moment, whether it's a physical hurt or it's the other kind, that footprint of upheaval or everything else that you've been going through. And so as we honor all those who've suffered racial injustice, the invitation is not to forget ourselves. And so inviting you now to take a deep, slow in-breath and holding it a moment and exhaling slowly, deeply. And a second long, slow in-breath all the way down into the belly. And an exhale. Allowing these breaths to settle you, soothe you if they will, and if they do. And now breathing naturally. Simply relax into your own natural breath. And I'm going to say some words right now, inspired by a guided meditation by Thich Nhat Hanh. And I invite you to follow along and let these words resonate with you. Breathing in, I'm aware of my whole body. Breathing out, I calm my whole body. Breathing in, I know I'm alive. Breathing out, I feel the joy of being alive. Breathing in, I bring to mind the beings who are suffering. Breathing out, I breathe out love for them all. May they be well. Breathing in, I bring into my heart the many Black people and other people of color who have suffered racism in this country and elsewhere. Breathing out, I breathe out love for all of them. May their struggles, suffering, and fears be eased. Breathing in, I remember George Floyd and others who couldn't breathe. Breathing out, I breathe for them. Breathing in, I remember that all beings are connected. Breathing out, I vow to honor our connection in ways that feel right for me to do so. Breathing in, I call to mind this planet that is home to humans and many other life forms. Breathing out, I breathe for all living beings. Breathing in, I observe the coming and the going of the waves in the ocean. Breathing out, I contemplate the no coming and no going of the waves. Breathing in, I bow to the mystery of existence. Breathing out, I know I am part of the mystery of existence. Inviting you now to continue breathing in, breathing out, using any internal words of blessing that you wish, or simply meditating and breathing in silence. And now, as this meditation comes to an end, I invite us to consider our breath, this breath that we rest in and witness as we meditate. This breath that some of us have rested in for a long time, that can carry us into states of stillness. Can we remember too that the breath, your breath, connects you with all that is living? It's a connection with all living beings. Can we remember that as well? And honoring that connection as we breathe. The Buddha said, all is burning, burning with the fire of lust, with the fire of hate, with the fire of delusion, burning with birth, aging, death, with sorrow, lamentation, grief, and despair. All is burning. This is from the Buddha's fire sermon. A friend of mine recently referred to this sermon, and I'm quoting it as she did at the beginning of this talk, because what could be more descriptive? We're all standing in the fire these days from the fallout of the COVID crisis. Though with regard to that, we're in different places, but we're all feeling it one way or another. The political divisiveness in this country at a time when we so badly need unity and a sense of support. And the shocking events of the recent weeks. You know, even if we're relatively comfortable, even if financially we're fairly comfortable, if we're working from the peace of relative peace of our own home, these issues still affect us all, and I think we know. We're still burning because we're interrelated. It can't be another way, can it? Tonight, I want to offer some comments about the place that we're in right now, and especially the racial crisis. And I do it with a lot of humility, because I must tell you, as a white woman that I am relatively comfortable. And I have taken for granted for many years my whiteness and what it meant. I didn't pay much attention to it, in fact. It was just the way things were in my life. My comments this evening come from the perspective of me, who is waking up to what diversity, racial inequity truly means, to those realities. But I will tell you right now, I'm not as knowledgeable as many people, including many people at IMCC, who know so much more than I do about this. So much more. So it has been both daunting and an incredible privilege to be giving and talking with you tonight on this topic. Now, some of you here at IMCC are fairly new to IMCC, and very possibly fairly new to discussing racism. I mean, we hear about it in the media all the time, but many of us haven't participated, or some of us probably haven't participated actively in talking about racism. Particularly white people can be very uncomfortable discussing racism. So I'm going to be addressing many of my comments tonight to those of you for whom an inquiry into racism is a fairly new experience. And as I said, very possibly not very comfortable experience. You may wonder, how is racism, injustice actually related to spiritual practice? You know, I think maybe some of you, some of us came to meditation and that we are doing with the thought, it's going to be about peace and loving kindness and contentment and compassion, all these beautiful equanimity, all these beautiful qualities that we desire and we wish to embody and radiate. And then there's the anger and the violence and the jealousy and the fear and the hatred. It's like, this is just the stuff we want to overcome. This is the non-spiritual stuff, we think. And it's amazing, I think, how long that assumption, even in subtle ways, even when we know better, in subtle ways, when we think, we got to get past that. This is not, I'm going to be spiritual by expressing these other wonderful qualities. So that's one thing that I think when we're fairly new, even when we're not so new, we can think about, well, really, really, how is this related to spiritual practice? And also, I think you may wonder, as many of us do, what kind of action can you take with regard to social justice that would make any difference? And I think that's another question that a lot of people are asking, and I want to touch on both of those tonight. And first, though, I want to talk about systemic racism, just a few words. And again, admission time. For a long time, I didn't know what it was, systemic racism. I didn't really, I could hear the direction that the words pointed in, but I really didn't know what it pointed to. And I'm just going to say, as I said, a few words and say that it is a system, what we want to call it poison, that ripples throughout every single institution in all of the major institutions in our country, whether it's justice and law enforcement, or education, or healthcare, or housing, the workforce, all of them have been affected by racialized. For all of them, people of color, and especially Black people, are regarded as lesser. And if you touch one and pull that out, it's like a hologram. Each one reflects all the others. You can't just dissect one system and call that a racialized system. They all are, all these institutions. It's been ongoing. It is ongoing. And this is systemic racism. It is not only in our institutions, this racial inequity that we display as a nation. Systemic racism often comes through in subtle decisions and choices that not only are made collectively as a culture, but that we make ourselves. And maybe not even being aware of it, maybe not even directed or motivated by being racist or hatred, things that we aren't even quite aware of. I'm going to be talking in a little while about particularly white privilege, because most of us here, not all of us, but most of us here are white, and what that means. But it's important now to say this is part of this systemic racism that is so emblematic of what our country is about. Racism has often been described as the core wound of American culture. And Ruth King, who has been to IMCC and offered wonderful teachings here for quite a number of years, she has called racism the birth defect of this nation, the birth defect. Yes, we have made progress at times toward reducing racism, and there have been many setbacks as well. And I know that we all hope that perhaps this current turmoil is going to change things. And I think all of us have been reading or hearing about questions about defunding the police force, significant changes in police forces, directing more funds to social services, and perhaps going even beyond that. Going beyond that, we hope. I'd like to point out tonight that probably the biggest toll that racism takes in this country is the withholding of love. By discriminating against people of color. as well as those who are otherwise different from our mainstream society, our white, Christian, straight society. By those who differ, in effect, our society not only withholds approval, but withholds love. It's the withholding of love of the larger community. You know, we can look, and many people just horrified by some of the violence of the protests and the looting that has happened. And I think our Justice Department has described this as domestic terrorism. I was listening the other day to Trevor Noah, who is far more than a late night comedian. And he explains that the violent protests are expressions of the frustration and outrage carried by people who have been excluded from full participation in the social contract. They've been expected, as in that understanding that exists between a nation, the larger culture, and the citizens. They've been expected, yes, to fulfill the obligations of a citizen, but the rights of citizenship haven't been given to them fully. And he questions, as many of us may, the legitimacy of a social contract that applies to some but not to all. White people have very different experiences and perceptions of what law and order mean within this social contract. And just how big this gap was illustrated in 2015 in Baltimore in an incident that some of us have talked about. This was the time of the protests, the demonstrations against the murder of Freddie Gray, who was in police custody. It was during those protests that a mother of one of the protesters walked out into one of these demonstrations, went over to her son who was demonstrating, slapped him, and told him to come with her. And he did. The white people who were standing around there applauded. They approved. They assumed she was correcting her son and showing him he wasn't being a law-abiding citizen. There's the gap. That's not what she was doing. She feared for his life because she knew as a Black man in the middle of a protest, even a peaceful protest, he risked being shot. And if the protest turned violent, that risk was really great. He was in grave danger. There's an African proverb, it is, the child who is not embraced by the village will burn it down to feel the warmth. The child who is not embraced by the village will burn it down to feel the warmth. A proverb from Nigeria, which I recently heard Tara Brach quote, like, wow, how appropriate. So when we look at it really clearly, the violence that we're seeing, now not a lot of that violence is not by local protesters, by the way. But when we look clearly, you can see this violence is a response of people who are deprived of love by the society. And I want to read now some comments by Zenju Earthland Manuel. She is a Black woman, she's a lesbian and a Zen priest. And she's written a profound book called The Way of Tenderness. In that book, she wrote, I don't write to receive pity or an apology for the hurts imposed upon me. I write to speak up, to acknowledge the devastation wrought among us when a human life is omitted in the midst of humanity and treated as less than a treasure amid life in general. The way in which I was perceived and treated depended on a structure of race, sexuality, gender, and class. The perverse power of these structures made my embodiment unacceptable to others and to myself. I'd come not to trust my own innate wisdom. By internalizing the judgments of those who felt certain types of folks are lesser, I had betrayed myself. I had yielded to oppression. I had yielded to oppression. Oppression is a distortion of our true nature. It disconnects us from the earth and from each other. It is this very system of silencing, ignoring, and annihilating the presence of other living beings that has wrought so much suffering in this world. We will not have loved enough when this world comes to an end. It's Zenju Earthland Manual. So to a question that many of us ask, and that is, how is racial injustice related to our spiritual practice? In the broadest sense, our practice is about bridging separation. And that can be understood, bridging separation, on different levels. It can be understood in terms of the racism that poisons daily life and makes people not trust each other and be fearful of each other. It can also be understood on an existential level. And that is the level where we feel separate from others and ourselves. Tonight, we are focusing on this very everyday level and pointing out that the racism is separation. It's a denial of our common humanity. And our spiritual practice is medicine that heals us. It heals us from the sense of separation. It enables us to recognize our interrelatedness. You know, as contemplatives, we are practicing and learning to see things as they truly are. And as many of us have recognized, you know, this isn't easy. There's far more than seeing things as they truly are than we ever suspected at the beginning. It involves the transformation of consciousness. And what slowly dawns on us as we practice is just how greatly our vision has been skewed by our conditioning, how much we have not seen things as they are. I would suggest that the white people that I referenced a little while ago in this observing the Black mother slapping her son didn't see things as they are. And it's just not them. It's all of us in one way or another. Our visions are skewed. Ultimately, our path, as the poet T.S. Eliot said, it calls for not less than everything. Which means that we are called to surrender all our dear beliefs and the things we identify with as me. And that sounds frightening, doesn't it? Not less than everything sounds really frightening. And we don't have to worry. It doesn't happen until we're ready. I think, you know, it's not going to be dropped on you and hit you on the head. But the result of that, the result of this not less than everything, of that surrender, is love. It's tenderness for the world. I want to quote something written by Pema Chodron in her classic book, When Things Fall Apart. She wrote about it was a talk that she attended about a man who was describing some spiritual experiences he had back in India in the 1960s. And he described himself as he was struggling against a lot of difficult emotions, anger and fear and laziness and pride. He had a whole list of them. And his teacher in India, he had a meditation teacher, told him, just stop struggling. And the man couldn't stop struggling. So the teacher said, okay, he sent him out to some hut, a small place in the foothills, I guess, of the Himalayas. So here I'm going to read now from Pema Chodron's description of his talk. He shut the door and settled down to practice, and when it got dark, he lit 3 small candles. Around midnight, he heard a noise in the corner of the room, and in the darkness, he saw a very large snake. It looked to him like a king cobra. It was right in front of him, swaying. All night, he stayed totally alert, keeping his eyes on the snake. He was so afraid he couldn't move. There was just the snake and himself. Just before dawn, the last candle went out, and he began to cry. He cried not in despair, but from tenderness. He felt the longing of all the animals and people in the world. He knew their alienation and their struggle. All his meditation had been nothing but further separation and struggle. He accepted, really accepted wholeheartedly that he was angry and jealous, that he resisted and struggled, and that he was afraid. He accepted also that he was precious beyond measure, wise and foolish, rich and poor, and totally unfathomable. He felt so much gratitude that in the total darkness, he stood up, walked toward the snake, and bowed. And she ends by saying, he put it at the end of the lecture that much intimacy with fear caused his dramas to collapse, and the world around him finally got through. This is what our practice does. It does for all of us at moments, maybe not just the way it happened. It doesn't have to happen like it happened for this man in a hut in India. But it breaks through to us. It breaks through. When we stay around long enough, that's what happens. Now again, going back to Zenju Erklin Manuel, she calls this practice the way of tenderness. That's what we're doing. And she wrote, and this was just last week now in a blog, she wrote, if you have nothing to say, now is the time for the deeper silence, honed, that does not apologize or seek something kind to say. Come down here, where the only lullaby tonight will be your heart drumming the song you were born with. The heart drumming the song we were born with. The breaking open, that's what it's about. Bridging the separation between ourself and ourself and ourself and others. And then the question that we might ask, and I think many of us do, is what can I do, and what difference will what I do make any difference at all? Change anything for the better with regard to racial oppression? And I think the first answer with regard to what to do is to do whatever you feel called to do, what feels right for each of us to do. And it will be a different answer for each of us. I'll add you, we have on our website, under the resources tab, there is a list of resources regarding racial awareness. And in that list, there is one that I'll draw your attention to, and it's called 75 Things White People Can Do for Social Justice. 75 things white people can do for social justice. And by the way, it's not just white people who can do them. There are many things that can be done. We need only look and see what's right for you. It's not about going out and feeling you must do it a certain way. You find what speaks to you. As for making a significant difference, this is a subject for real inquiry. Finally, it's not about the size of our offering. It's not at all about the size of our offering. It's about the simple act of offering for its own sake, because it is what is right for you to do. Not whether thousands, or even tens of people benefit. doing it unconditionally, letting go of our transactional mind and just be and do from the sincerity of a heart space. This is what we each can come to and find out as we practice. And I'd like to say that whatever your choice, however, whatever your choice about action with regard to social engagement, it is important for us as white people, and I'm saying not all of us are whites, but it is important for us, for white people who are spiritual seekers, to explore our unseen bias, which is called white privilege. All people, regardless of race, have unseen bias. For us in particular, as white people, we've got a pretty powerful form of it, and that's white privilege. With our mother's milk or the baby formula, we absorb the attitudes of the white dominant class. They're unconscious. They drive our perceptions about life and how we perceive people of color. White privilege, a dominant class, views people of color as subordinate and lesser. It can be really subtle. It doesn't have to come on with the face of a policeman with his knee on George Floyd's neck. It can be something very subtle and something we do ourselves without meaning any harm at all. I want to read to you one example of white privilege. And this was in a blog by Lori Locken Hutcherson. She is a Black woman, and she writes a blog. She was asked by a friend of hers, a white friend of hers, if she could explain to him what white privilege was. He said he was really trying to understand. He knew he was missing something. So she wrote to him several examples of white privilege that she had experienced to help him understand. And by the way, she was on a program Krista Tippett, Lori Locken Hutcherson was. Okay, so I'm going to quote here. She said, "When I got accepted to Harvard, 3 separate times I encountered white strangers as I prepped for my maiden trip to Cambridge that rankle to this day. The first was the white doctor giving me a physical at Kaiser." And then she says, me, quotes, "I need to send an immunization report to my college so I can matriculate. Doctor, where are you going? Me, Harvard. Doctor, you mean the one in Massachusetts?" The second, she goes on, the second was in a store looking for supplies I needed from Harvard's suggested what to bring with you list. Store employee, where are you going? Me, Harvard. Store employee, you mean the one in Massachusetts? The third was at UPS, shipping off a box of said what to bring to Harvard. I was in line behind a white boy mailing boxes to Princeton and in front of a white woman sending her child's boxes to wherever. Woman to the boy, what college are you going to? Boy, Princeton. The woman, congratulations. And to me, she says, where are you sending your boxes? Me, Harvard. Woman, you mean the one in Massachusetts? And then Lori Locken Hutcherson says, I think, no, bitch, the one downtown next to the liquor store. But I say, then she goes on, I say, gesturing to my labeled boxes, yes, the one in Massachusetts. Then she says, congratulations, but it's too fucking late. Then Lori Locken Hutcherson says, the point here, and now she's writing to her friend, the point here is, if no one has ever questioned your intellectual capabilities or attendance at an elite institution based solely on your skin color, that is white privilege. I'll read that again. The point here is, If no one has ever questioned your intellectual capabilities or attendance at an elite institution based solely on your skin color, that is white privilege. For the past about a decade now, IMCC has been exploring racial injustice and white privilege. Among other things, Ruth King has come several times to our community and offered workshops and trainings in racial awareness. And subsequently, we have started racial affinity groups. These are small groups in which members explore their unseen bias. Right now, we have 4 groups. And the groups provide a really safe place, a non-judgmental place in which its members can wake up to their own racism. And this happens through conversations in the group with one another, inner inquiry and reading. And people come together, we talk honestly and openly about our individual and our group biases. It's about awakening together. Now, I will comment here because I know I've heard it from some people in IMCC who perhaps haven't done a lot of training in this area. And one of the first reactions when we start investigating our white privilege is guilt, huge sense of guilt. We begin to feel that we are horrible people as we begin to really recognize our white privilege. Through our participation in a racial affinity group, our inner inquiry, we can realize that we're not horrible if we hold racial bias. We're normal. We have been conditioned by our culture, by our society. From the perspective of a contemplative seekers, which we are, what is horrible is not to recognize without judgment. If we don't, with judgment, to recognize with judgment and think we're horrible, that is horrible. When we begin to do this inner inquiry, we realize, all right, we hold it, we accept it. This is just part of living in this society, and we bring compassion to ourselves in this painful place of recognition. We begin to recognize our deep relatedness to all people, and it's quite a journey. So I would like to share with you a story of something that happened for me a few years ago as I was working with my biases. And I was in, I've told some of you this already, I was in a checkout line in a shop buying some things. The cashier was a Black woman. And in front of me in the line was a white man, then a Black woman, and then I was the third person. The cashier, who was a Black woman, said good morning to the man she was serving, the white man. He didn't answer. He looked down and kind of mumbled something, good morning. And I was horrified. For a moment, I thought, well, maybe he's just shy. But no, he had just been talking to another woman who was standing right there very openly, very freely. It was just racism. I looked at this cashier and I saw the look on her face. You could just see her emotions passing through. It tore my heart how painful this was for her. So she finished with her transaction with this man. And then the next person in line was the Black woman. And they spoke to each other very quietly, but I was standing right there. I heard just a little bit of it. And the Black cashier said to this other Black customer, she said, my mama told me it was going to be hard. So she finished her transaction with that woman. And then it was my turn. And I handed her the stuff I was buying. And I looked at her and I said, good morning. And she was kind of surprised and she nodded good morning. And then she started to ring up my transaction. And while she was doing that, I said, it's hard, isn't it? And she rang up my transaction. And then after she finished that, she took the receipt and came out from behind the counter. And she came over to me, she handed me the receipt, and she put her arms around me and hugged me. And she said, God bless you. And I put my arms around her, and there we were hugging in the middle of the store. I said, God bless you. And I'm telling you this because, first of all, it's incredibly beautiful experience, like a blessing, if that happened. And I will say, I by no means am claiming that I speak with people of color with that heart, with that perception. There are times when I can mess up terribly. So this is not necessarily what I do all the time, but that time was truly special. And I know for sure it could not have happened if I had not been doing this inner work. If I had not been doing this work into my own unseen bias, I would have been so embarrassed by what this man had said and what happened that by the time my turn came, it would have been all about me. I would have tried to show this woman that I wasn't racist. I don't know what I would have done, but I know it would have been very awkward. But because I did and have done that work, what I was able to do was I could see it in terms of her and to respond for her. And she knew that. It was just two simple little phrases that I uttered, but it was from the heart and she felt it. And I mean, for me, this is just a testimony to what this work means and what it can be done and what can be done as a result. And I'll again say, as contemplatives, we are seeking to expand our awareness. And we are limiting ourselves in our spiritual practice if we don't investigate this area, the area of unseen bias. So here at IMCC, we are forming a new racial affinity group. It's every group has its own format, and this one has yet to be formed, but by and large, it probably will meet, and I don't know, it will have to be checked out, so I can't speak for the group leaders, though I know they're here tonight, but I won't get into details. The new group will probably meet one time a month for maybe an hour and a half to 2. Because IMCC is a predominantly white community, our racial affinity groups, the 4 of them that we have, and we do have 4, are white, the participants are white. The point of affinity, racial affinity groups, is that each group is comprised of members of the same race. Because until our bias, because that offers a safe place in which to discuss one's biases. Because until biases are truly seen, racial biases, and brought into awareness, our conversations with people of color risk being very, very rocky. Communications are hindered. We will say things without meaning that will offend, and they may do the same. So what we are doing here is we're having one racial affinity group that we're offering, and we would like to offer a racial affinity group for people of color. We'd like to support the formation of racial affinity group for people of color. We want to put that word out. And let me say here, got to qualify. We recognize, of course, that people of color, that's a great, huge group, have each, and we're talking just now racially, each come from a different culture and have a variety of different biases and perspectives, not all the same. It would be ideal if we could have a racial affinity group for Black Americans, for Native Americans, for Asian Americans, for Hispanic Americans, whatever. We can't, we just don't have that many people. But we would like to start, if there is interest, or have started a racial affinity group for people of color. So putting that out, 2 groups. One, which would be a predominantly white group, and the other, we will hope there'll be enough interest for a people of color group. If you are interested in participating, Judy sent out the newsletter that she sent out. You can click on that and let her know. And if you're interested in participating in the people of color, a people of color affinity group, let her know that as well. I will say, at present, with the one group that we're starting, space is limited. The groups are small, only 8 people. So it's going to have to be kind of first, maybe 9, but I don't know. It'll have to be first come, first served. If you're interested, please let Judy know. And she and Bev won, because Bev is the person who coordinates this. We'll discuss it. We'll be in touch with you. And if, in fact, we have no idea how much interest there will be, but if there's a lot of interest, who knows? Judy, Bev Wan is asked, please be patient. We're going to try to do the best we can to meet all of the interests. And that includes a people of color affinity group. So I thank you for listening.